Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer.
Yes, we made it to the end of the week. I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us. We begin with that breaking news from overnight. A historic auto strike now underway.
At midnight, the United Auto Workers Union officially went on strike against all of the three automakers, the big three, after failing to reach a deal on new contracts. The strike marks the first simultaneous walkout by union workers at all three U.S. automakers.
Tonight, for the first time in our history, we will strike all three of the big three at once. And if we need to go all out, we will. Everything is on the table.
The union had been calling for a 40% raise over the next 4 years. They also want a boost to their pension, plus the end of temporary employees. But the two sides could not reach an agreement. For more on this, we are joined by NBC News correspondent Jay Gray at a Ford auto plant in Wayne, Michigan. Also with us, Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver. Jay, let's start with you. The strike now officially underway. Workers are on the picket lines at three locations, including the one you're at right now. So where do things stand this morning? What are both sides saying?
Well, both sides saying they're still far apart. I want to give you a look at the picket line here in Wayne, just outside of Detroit. There are also lines at a GM plant in Missouri, as well as a Stellus plant in Ohio. And although less than 13,000 of the union's 145,000 or so members left the assembly line for the picket line, this is part of what they're calling a stand-up picket, a unique style being employed by the union where they are just having divisions of plants in certain areas walk out. So you'll still see union members crossing the picket line here to go to work inside this plant, something we haven't seen in the past. The idea, according to union management, is to keep the automakers confused and uncertain about what may come next. And as you just heard from the president, they say they are willing and do plan to expand this strike as this continues to go further and further. And look, the one good news in all of this is that while the talks broke down yesterday and both sides accused the other of not negotiating in good faith, they have said that they are ready and willing to come back to the bargaining table, perhaps as early as today.
Caleb, who's here on set with us, let's talk impact. I mean, what does this ultimately mean for the broader economy? Explain how that could be impacted.
Yeah, right now there's 12,700 members striking. If all members strike, if we get a complete shutdown of production across all of these plants, we're talking at about $500 million-ish a day, according to estimates. If it goes on 10 days, you're looking at around $10 billion to the overall economy. Most of that is in lost wages and productivity. But on the consumer side, you might not be able to get parts for repairs. You might not be able to get the car you wanted. Ultimately, car prices and automobile prices are going to go up. They're up 25% since before the pandemic already. So higher wages is going to mean higher prices for cars. Right now, smallish in scale, this strike, but it could get a lot bigger.
As we mentioned, this is the first time we've seen a strike simultaneously against all three big automakers. Could that make it easier to reach a deal? Could it make it harder to reach a deal?
Yeah, well, they're all far apart on different parts of the agreement. So GM did offer a bigger pay raise. Ford has come back to the table with a smaller raise. They all have to kind of have consensus if they all want to have agreement on this. As you heard Sean Payne say, they're willing to go all out. So it's going to be a tough negotiation. Three automakers, three different sets of concerns, plus 147,000 workers. Could be tough.
Yeah, Jay, with that in mind, all those details that Caleb just laid out, I mean, how long could this last? It doesn't sound like they're very close when it comes to some of these details. What do we think?
No, not at all. In fact, I talked to one of the union negotiators that was in the room yesterday during their talks, and he says they are miles apart. He feels like it's going to take some time and does feel like the strike will expand. So that's not good news on just the opening day of this work stoppage.
All right, Jay Gray, Caleb Silver, thank you for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Let's turn now to the legal battle facing President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who was indicted by federal prosecutors yesterday.
Hunter Biden was charged with 3 counts related to the possession of a gun while using narcotics. The president's son is accused of lying about his drug use on a federal form when he bought the gun back in 2018. An attorney for Hunter Biden says the charges were unwarranted and politically motivated. The White House has so far remained silent, but the case could prove to be a headache for President Biden as he runs for for re-election.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News Now legal analyst Angela Senadella. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being here. Monica, we'll start with you. Just walk us through exactly what these charges are that Hunter Biden's facing and the punishment that could come with them if he were to be found guilty.
Good morning, guys. So this relates to 3 new charges specifically related to possession of that firearm from nearly 5 years ago. And the reason I mentioned the timing is important because there was a statute of limitations that was set to expire shortly on this. So that is likely why these charges were brought now in terms of the timing. Now, exactly what we're looking at here, these are 2 false statements related to information that is needed to have a firearm like the one that Hunter Biden possessed. And the third one is the fact that he had this firearm while he was under a controlled substance, while he was using drugs. So the penalty for the first and the third carry a 10-year maximum sentence, and the second a 5-year sentence. Now, remember, earlier in the summer, there was a plea deal that was essentially going to go through a pretrial diversion agreement, something that had been negotiated on these gun charges, while separately the president's son was going to plead guilty to some misdemeanor tax charges. And that is something they were hoping was going to be wrapped up. But that all collapsed when a judge was asking questions about potential immunity that was going to be granted to Hunter Biden. So that's why we're here where we are now, and why a special counsel was elevated to this to continue to investigate. And the Department of Justice here says that they're still investigating, and there could be more to come from all of this. Savannah and Joe.
Angela, let's talk about these charges. First of all, how serious are they? Second, how common are they?
Good morning. So, Joe, they are both very serious and also not that common. So, as Monica said, he is facing up to 25 years in prison, which in itself shows the seriousness of the charges. That said, nothing about this entire process has been normal. The diversion agreement, the plea agreement, none of those are commonly happen. And this charge isn't even commonly prosecuted. So there's just a lot of questions as to what has happened and also how things will proceed.
Absolutely. Monica, Joe mentioned just a moment ago that an attorney for Hunter Biden has said the charges were unwarranted, politically motivated. What else have we heard from his legal team?
Yeah, this is really something they say for years has been the case, that they have tried to work with prosecutors here. And we did hear a little bit more from his attorney, Abby Lowell. I want to play a little bit of that specifically on this issue.
They knew all the facts for years. The law, if it has changed at all, as you pointed out, there have been at least 2 federal courts that have found this law in particular to be unconstitutional. And therefore, you have to ask what changed. And what changed, you also just talked about. It is the folks like Chairman Comer and the Republican MAGA crazies who have been pressuring this U.S. attorney to do something to vindicate their political position. And guess what? They succeeded.
You are seeing Hunter Biden's personal attorneys refer to the political here, which is, of course, another part of this story. But it is historic. It's the first time that the son of a sitting president has ever been indicted on these charges. And again, that may be their response specifically related to the gun matter. On the tax question, there's still a lot we don't know about what could happen or what charges could potentially be brought there.
Yeah, Angela, I want to ask you more about that. The special counsel's office says the investigation continues. So what is the potential for more charges here?
So the special counsel is making clear here that nothing is off the table, that this could possibly be just the beginning. I also think, though, it's a signal to Biden's attorneys. Come back in. Let's negotiate another plea agreement, possibly. So last time, I believe the plea agreement just was totally obliterated because Hunter refused to go to jail. Now, look, he's facing prison time almost definitively. So if I were his lawyers, I would be going back and thinking, look, now anything could happen. Let's agree to a little bit of prison time in exchange for other charges going away. So yeah, there's tax charges possible. And also there's the whole question of foreign dealings, which we haven't even looked at yet.
And Monica, as we look ahead and connect this to the president himself, how much of a problem could this be for the president headed into next year's election?
Well, it certainly takes an emotional toll on the president, who has always said he stands by his son, he loves his son, and that he comes at this as a father first and commander-in-chief second. So this is certainly an intense moment for them as a family. And the White House has always said, we're not going to weigh in on this, simply to say that they are a family and we need to set that aside. But they're hoping, and in conversations with sources, that there are some voters out there who will see this as something potentially relatable in terms of a lot of families who've struggled with addiction, who've had these kinds of issues. And again, this all is tangentially connected to an impeachment inquiry that was launched this week in terms of the first steps about potential investigations into Hunter Biden. But the most important thing the White House says here is that there is no linkage or evidence so far between his alleged business dealings and his father, and expect the White House to continue to make that point while not weighing in specifically on the Hunter Biden charges. Guys.
All right, Monica and Angela, thank you both very much. Well, 2 co-defendants in the Georgia election interference trial are headed to court earlier than the 17 other accused, earlier than former President Donald Trump. The Georgia judge agreed to sever the cases of lawyers Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesborough, saying the courthouse does not have enough room to hold all of the defendants in one room for trial. Powell and Chesborough were the only 2 that requested a speedy trial. They're set to begin their joint trial on October 23rd. The ruling goes against the wishes of Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who is looking to try all 19 defendants simultaneously. The presiding judge warned further separations might be required, but said that decision will be made once all pretrial motions have been resolved.
This morning, at least 7 million people are under tropical storm warnings in New England, preparing as Hurricane Lee is finally set to make landfall this weekend. The storm system has been crawling across the Atlantic for more than a week. It's still unclear if Lee will make landfall in the U.S. or in Canada, but the impacts will be felt either way. We're talking about heavy rains, flooding, and strong winds in the forecast for that region. Let's bring in Coast Guard Master Chief Officer Lance Weiser for more on this. Good to have you with us. So, what conditions are we going to expect in the coming days as the storm moves up the coast, and how are you preparing for it right now?
Well, I'm out here on Nantucket at Coast Guard Station Brant Point. We have sustained 25 to 30 knot winds coming through this morning, going to increase 3 to 50 knot winds overnight. We are monitoring the storm surge and expect a 2 to 4 foot storm surge here out on Nantucket. And as the rest of the units across New England, Coast Guard units are preparing for their harbors and all of their specific locations.
Got it. So what worries you most about this storm as it gets closer, and how are your teams preparing to respond to any emergencies during the storm?
What worries is when people are not prepared. We try to make sure that everyone's prepared and informed, and definitely stress that being prepared and informed of the situation, staying away from the beaches and cliffs and anywhere where a tidal surge can be a danger to you. As far as preparing, we're pulling our small boats out of the water in preparation. They'll be ready to launch if we need them. And the larger boats are going to be tied down at the dock in standby in case we need to go out.
All right, Master Chief Officer Lance Weiser, thanks so much for joining us ahead of the storm coming this weekend. We appreciate it.
So where is Lee now, and where is it headed? Let's check in with meteorologist Angie Lassman for the latest. Hey, Angie.
Hey there, guys. We've got all the details, and let's start with those alerts that we just mentioned. We do have the tropical storm warnings in effect, where you see that brighter orange extending from basically the Canadian border with Maine all the way down to Westport, Massachusetts. We're continuing to see tropical storm conditions likely starting for folks in the southern portions of this area by the time we get into the late part of today. The farther north you go, that's where we'll start to see those conditions deteriorating flooding as we get into the evening hours and overnight hours and eventually early tomorrow morning and beyond through your Saturday. That brighter pink, that's the hurricane watch that's in effect for parts of coastal Maine. That is where we could potentially be seeing some hurricane conditions as this system gets a little closer. And it is moving a little faster at this hour. Northerly movement at 16 miles per hour. You can see still just under about 400 miles to the south-southeast of Nantucket. Winds are at 85 miles per hour, so you might have noticed in the past 24 hours we've started to see it weaken a little bit. We've expected that. It is a Category 1 right now. It'll probably weaken a little more here now through the next 24 hours, but that doesn't really change the impacts that we'll likely see across parts of the East Coast. I say the East Coast because we're still dealing with those coastal issues for the high rip current risk, the large waves, the storm, the kind of dangerous surf that we're going to see over the next couple of days. That's going to last as far south as places like Charleston, Georgia. We'll see that even as far south as Florida, we could see those conditions. But as far as the winds are concerned from this system, really extensive wind field. This is something we've been expecting. As it moves to the north, it kind of has expanded. So that means folks from basically Nantucket up into portions just east of Boston could see some of those tropical storm force winds working through that area here as we get into the late evening hours tonight. You'll notice that we're expecting it to make landfall in a little bit of a more shrunken down area. Of course, as that time gets a little closer, we get that better into view exactly where that will end up. It looks like later into the day, Saturday, probably Nova Scotia, probably maybe into Bay of Fundy. We'll see. But either way, it looks less likely it'll actually make landfall by that time in parts of the United States. But, you know, either way, we're going to see this continuing impacts for folks in the New England area. So there's those winds. They extend more than 200, more than 300 in some spots out from the center of the system. So that means that winds will be elevated, especially along the coast. Bar Harbor, 58 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour in Provincetown. So the closer you are to the coast, the stronger the winds. But even look inland. Hartford could see gusty conditions at 30 miles per hour or a little higher than that. Now, the storm surge, we've seen a little bit of an improvement on that forecast, 1 to 3 feet. We're not looking at the more moderate to elevated coastal flooding, but we could see some minor to moderate. So something to watch, especially if you live near the coast. 1 to 3 feet, though, that's an improvement from where we were yesterday, where some spots in Cape Cod Bay, we're going to see 2 to 4 feet, guys. And of course, we'll see some of that heavier rain in down East Maine, maybe up to 5 inches. So the flooding will be a concern, but it's the biggest thing is going to be the power outages, the down trees, of course, with those stronger winds, and along the coast, the flooding. And of course, no swimming in the water, please.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Great safety reminder.
Yes.
Thanks, Angie.
See, you got the
Appreciate
memo
it.
today.
We're feeling blue today.
Love it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.